Story 1. The Hitchhiker with No Face. Raymond Fisher had been driving 18-wheelers for 26 years, hauling freight across the Pacific Northwest between Washington and California. On October 31, 2018, he was transporting a load of lumber from Portland, Oregon to Sacramento, California, taking Interstate 5 south through the night. His truck was a 2016 Freightliner Cascadia with over 550,000 miles on the odometer, reliable and familiar. The Halloween night was cold, temperatures in the low 40s with fog rolling in from the coast creating patches of reduced visibility along the highway. Raymond had left Portland around 7:01 p.m. planning to drive straight through and arrive in Sacramento by early morning. He was an experienced night driver, comfortable with the darkness and the solitude that came with overnight hauls. The highway was moderately busy with holiday traffic, families returning from trick-or-treating in nearby towns, other commercial vehicles making their scheduled runs. Raymond's CB radio played soft conversations between drivers, and he sipped coffee from an insulated mug, staying alert and focused. Around 11:45 p.m. as Raymond passed through a particularly dense patch of fog near the town of Weed, California, he saw someone standing on the shoulder of the highway. The figure was waving both arms overhead in the universal signal for distress, illuminated briefly in Raymond's headlights before the fog obscured the view again. Raymond's instinct was to help, but decades of experience had taught him caution about roadside strangers, especially on isolated stretches of highway late at night. However, something about the figure's desperate movements convinced Raymond this was a legitimate emergency. He slowed his truck and pulled onto the shoulder approximately 100 yards past the person, activating his hazard lights. In his mirrors, he watched the figure approach, jogging through the fog toward his truck. Raymond rolled down his passenger window as the person reached the cab, and his breath caught in his throat at what his dome light revealed. The hitchhiker appeared to be male, average height and build, wearing jeans and a dark jacket that looked soaked with water or some other liquid. But where the face should have been, there was nothing, absolutely nothing. Not a mask, not a deformity, not an injury, but rather a complete absence, a void where features should have existed. The head was the right shape, but the front of it was smooth and featureless, like a mannequin that had never been painted with facial details. Yet despite having no visible eyes, the thing turned its head toward Raymond, clearly aware of him, clearly looking at him with senses that shouldn't exist. Raymond's hand froze on the door handle, every muscle in his body locked with primal terror. The hitchhiker raised one hand and made a gesture, pointing at itself, then at the passenger seat, a clear request for a ride. The hand looked normal, human fingers with dirty fingernails. But the wedding ring on the fourth finger was tarnished almost black, and the skin had a grayish pallor that suggested something fundamentally wrong with the circulation or perhaps with life itself. The hitchhiker tapped on the window, the sound sharp and insistent, and Raymond saw that the fingers left smudges on the glass, dark stains that could have been mud or could have been something worse. The faceless head tilted, and despite the absence of any mouth, Raymond heard a voice, muffled and distant like it was coming from underwater or through heavy cloth. "Please, I need to get home. My wife is waiting. Please help me." The words were banal, ordinary, the kind of thing any stranded motorist might say. But coming from something with no mouth, no vocal cords visible, no mechanism for speech, the words were obscene, a violation of natural law. Raymond found his voice forcing words through a throat tight with fear. "What happened to you? Do you need medical help? I can call an ambulance." The faceless head shook side to side, a human gesture of refusal made horrifying by the blank surface where reactions should have been readable. "No ambulance, just need a ride. Just need to get home. 5 miles down the road, please. It's Halloween. I shouldn't be out here on Halloween. Bad things happen on Halloween." The voice carried a note of desperate pleading that might have been convincing if the speaker had possessed a face capable of expressing emotion. Raymond's rational mind screamed at him to drive away, to floor the accelerator and put distance between himself and this impossible thing. But another part of him, the part trained in emergency response and human decency, recognized genuine distress in that voice. And there was something else, a growing pressure inside his skull, a compulsion that felt external, like the hitchhiker was pushing thoughts into Raymond's mind, suggesting that refusing would have consequences worse than agreeing. Against every instinct of self-preservation, Raymond heard himself say, "Get in. 5 miles, then you get out." The hitchhiker's blank face seemed to orient toward him more directly, and though there was no mouth to smile with, Raymond had the distinct impression the thing was pleased. The passenger door opened and the hitchhiker climbed into the cab with movements that were almost normal, almost human, but slightly off in timing and coordination, like someone who had learned to mimic human motion without truly understanding it. The smell hit Raymond immediately, a nauseating combination of stagnant water, decay, and something chemical like formaldehyde. The hitchhiker settled into the passenger seat, and Raymond saw that the jacket and jeans were indeed soaked, water dripping onto the floor mat and seat. Far too much water for fog condensation or rain. It was like the hitchhiker had been submerged completely, pulled from a river or lake, and now sitting in Raymond's truck, spreading that drowning smell throughout the cab. Raymond pulled back onto the highway, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. His eyes fixed rigidly on the road ahead because he couldn't bear to look at his passenger. The hitchhiker sat motionless for perhaps 2 miles, the only sound the dripping of water and the hum of the truck's engine. Then it spoke again, that muffled underwater voice emerging from nowhere. "I died on Halloween, 23 years ago. Drove off the road in the fog. Car went into the lake, drowned before anyone found me. My wife died waiting for me to come home. Heart attack, they said. Broken heart, I know." Raymond's blood turned to ice as the implications sank in. The thing sitting next to him was describing its own death, claiming to have been dead for over 2 decades. Raymond forced himself to speak, to engage, thinking maybe conversation would keep the situation from escalating. "I'm sorry for your loss, for your death. But if you've been dead for 23 years, why are you here now? What do you want?" The faceless head turned toward him, and Raymond felt its eyeless gaze like pressure against his skin. "Every Halloween I come back, walk the same stretch of road where I died, try to get home, try to finish the drive I never completed. Most years nobody stops. They see me and they keep driving. Smart of them. But you stopped, Raymond. You let me in. And now I can show you what it's like." Raymond's stomach dropped as the hitchhiker used his name, something he had never provided. "Show me what?" His voice came out as a whisper, barely audible over the engine noise. The hitchhiker reached toward him with one dripping hand, water running down the gray fingers, and touched Raymond's arm. The cold was instant and absolute, like plunging the limb into liquid nitrogen, and Raymond felt something rush through his body, a sensation of drowning from the inside out. His vision blurred, and suddenly Raymond was somewhere else, experiencing something else. He was in a car, a sedan from the 1990s, driving through thick fog on Halloween night. He could see his hands on the wheel, but they weren't his hands, they were someone else's, the hitchhiker's hands when the hitchhiker had been alive. Raymond felt the panic as the car hydroplaned on wet pavement, the sickening loss of control as the vehicle left the road and became airborne for a moment before plunging into dark water. The cold was unimaginable, water flooding into the car through vents and seams faster than seemed possible. Raymond, trapped in the memory, tried the door handle, found it locked or jammed by water pressure. He tried the windows, hitting the electric buttons, but the electrical system had shorted out. The water rose to his chest, his neck, his chin. He tilted his head back, gasping for the last air trapped against the car's ceiling. Then the water covered his face and he was drowning, lungs burning, body convulsing, consciousness fading into an agony that seemed to last forever. Raymond snapped back to the present with a gasping breath, finding himself still driving, still on the highway. But tears were streaming down his face and his lungs ached like he had actually been deprived of oxygen. The hitchhiker sat beside him, that terrible blank face oriented forward. "Now you know. Now you understand. Every Halloween I drown again. I experience it again. And I need someone to share it with, to witness it, to know what it was like so I'm not alone in that moment." Raymond's hands were shaking so badly he could barely control the truck. He slowed down, looking for a place to pull over, desperate to get this thing out of his vehicle. But the hitchhiker spoke again, the voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "5 miles, you said. We've gone 5 miles now. Time for me to get out." "Thank you for the ride, Raymond. Thank you for drowning with me. I'll see you again next Halloween. Now that you've shared my death, you're connected to me. You'll dream about drowning until next year when I'll find you again and we'll share it again. Every Halloween. Forever." The passenger door opened by itself and the hitchhiker climbed out while the truck was still moving at 40 miles per hour, dropping to the pavement and rolling into the fog without apparent injury. Raymond slammed on his brakes, bringing the truck to a complete stop, and stared at the passenger seat. It was dry, completely dry. No water stains, no evidence anyone had sat there. The smell was gone too, replaced by the normal scent of his cab's air freshener. But Raymond's arm, where the hitchhiker had touched him, was ice cold, numb, and when he pushed up his sleeve, he saw his skin was gray and wrinkled like he had been submerged in water for hours. Raymond drove straight to a hospital in Reading, abandoning his delivery schedule, and demanded to be examined. The doctors found his arm showed signs consistent with severe cold exposure and prolonged water immersion, but they couldn't explain how that was possible given Raymond's dry clothing and his claim to have been driving all night. They treated him for hypothermia in the affected limb and recommended psychiatric evaluation, which Raymond refused. He completed his delivery to Sacramento 12 hours late, filed a vague report about a medical emergency, and took 2 weeks of leave. During those 2 weeks, Raymond researched accidents along Interstate 5 near Weed, California on Halloween. He found the record easily enough. Michael Brennan, age 34, had died on Halloween night in 1995 when his vehicle left the road during heavy fog and plunged into Lake Shastina. His body had been recovered 3 days later, but the initial search had focused on the highway, not realizing the car had traveled far enough from the road to enter the lake. Michael's wife, Susan Brennan, had died of a heart attack 6 months later. Grief and stress cited as contributing factors. The newspaper article included a photo of Michael Brennan. Raymond stared at the face in the picture, a normal face with eyes and nose and mouth and smile, and tried to reconcile it with the blank void he had seen on the hitchhiker. Death had erased Michael's features, or perhaps Michael's ghost couldn't remember what he had looked like, couldn't reconstruct the details from memory alone, and so manifested as a faceless thing that retained only the general shape of humanity. Raymond returned to work, but he transferred to daytime routes and refused all assignments that would put him on Interstate 5 near Weed, California, especially anywhere near Halloween. His arm recovered physically over the following months, the gray pallor fading, sensation returning. But Raymond noticed something disturbing. Every night when he tried to sleep, he dreamed of drowning. The dreams were vivid and consistent, always the same. Trapped in a car filling with water, unable to escape, suffocating in darkness and cold. He would wake gasping, his sheets soaked with sweat, the sensation of water in his lungs so real he would cough for minutes trying to clear them. The dreams grew worse as Halloween 2019 approached, becoming more frequent and more intense until Raymond was barely sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night. On October 30th, Raymond called in sick, unable to work due to exhaustion. On Halloween night, he locked himself in his apartment, turned on every light, and tried to stay awake, terrified that the faceless hitchhiker would somehow find him despite the hundreds of miles separating them from that stretch of Interstate 5. At 11:45 p.m., exactly 1 year after picking up Michael Brennan's ghost, Raymond's apartment lights flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, Raymond heard dripping water, smelled stagnant lake water and decay, and felt the temperature plummet. A voice spoke from the darkness of his bedroom, muffled and underwater and horribly familiar. "Hello, Raymond. Time to drown again. Time to share my death again. Every Halloween I promised. Every Halloween forever." Raymond screamed, fumbling for a flashlight, finding it and clicking it on. The beam illuminated his bedroom, showing nothing unusual. No intruder, no ghost, no faceless horror. But the dripping sound continued, and when Raymond shined the light on his bed, he saw water spreading across the blankets, soaking into the fabric, pooling on the floor. The water was ice cold and it smelled like death, and it was rising, somehow flooding his second-floor apartment from no visible source. Raymond ran from his bedroom, splashing through water that was already ankle-deep, and fled his apartment in his pajamas. He spent Halloween night in his truck in a well-lit parking lot, shaking and crying, and he didn't return to his apartment until November 1st, when daylight made him feel marginally safer. The apartment was dry when he returned, no evidence of flooding, but Raymond's bedroom smelled faintly of lake water for weeks afterward. Raymond Fisher quit trucking entirely 3 months later, unable to handle the stress of driving at night, unable to cope with the monthly drowning dreams that had become a permanent feature of his life. He moved across the country to Maine, as far from California as he could get while staying in the continental United States, and he sought therapy for what he described as PTSD from a traumatic hitchhiker encounter, leaving out the supernatural elements. But every Halloween, no matter where Raymond is, no matter what precautions he takes, the faceless hitchhiker finds him. Sometimes it's a voice in the darkness. Sometimes it's a figure glimpsed in mirrors or windows. Sometimes it's just the smell of lake water and the sensation of drowning that overtakes him wherever he is. And each Halloween, Raymond shares Michael Brennan's death again, experiencing those final moments of panic and suffocation, bound forever to a ghost who died alone and refuses to remain alone in death, who collects witnesses to his drowning and chains them to his Halloween resurrection, travelers on an endless road that leads only to cold water and suffocating darkness, and the knowledge that some rides you accept will last far longer than the distance traveled. Story 2. The Rest Area Bathroom Stall. Gerald Thompson had been driving long-haul trucks for 17 years, specializing in overnight deliveries across the Midwest. On August 14, 2017, he was hauling a load of packaged foods from Indianapolis, Indiana to Kansas City, Missouri, running Interstate 70 west through Illinois. His truck was a 2015 Peterbilt 389 with a custom interior he had designed himself, including a premium sound system and comfortable sleeping arrangements. The summer night was warm, temperatures in the mid-70s with clear skies and excellent visibility. Gerald felt good, rested and alert, making excellent time on a route he had driven countless times before. Around 2:30 a.m., as Gerald crossed into Illinois, he felt the need for a bathroom break. According to his mental map of the route, there was a rest area approximately 15 miles ahead, a standard facility he had used many times before. The rest area appeared right on schedule, well lit and maintained with adequate parking for commercial vehicles. Gerald pulled in, parked his truck under a bright light, and walked toward the bathroom building, a low brick structure with separate entrances for men and women. The building was typical for Illinois rest areas, clean and functional if somewhat dated. Gerald pushed through the heavy door into the men's room, finding himself in a space lit by harsh fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. The bathroom was empty, no other travelers using the facilities at this late hour. 3 urinals lined one wall, 4 stalls occupied the other, their doors painted green and showing years of wear. Gerald chose the 3rd stall, the others appearing occupied based on closed doors, though he hadn't seen anyone else enter. Inside the stall, Gerald noticed immediately that something was off. The walls were covered in graffiti, which was normal for rest area bathrooms, but the content was disturbing. Rather than the usual crude jokes and phone numbers, the writing consisted of dates and names, dozens of them covering every available surface. Michael Chen, March 15, 2003. Robert Davidson, July 22, 2008. Thomas Alvarez, October 31, 2012. The dates spanned years stretching back to the 1990s, and each entry was accompanied by scratches in the paint. Tally marks or hash marks, like someone had been counting days or hours. Gerald felt uneasy looking at the writings, something about them suggesting desperation rather than casual vandalism. He used the toilet quickly, eager to finish and leave, but as he reached for the toilet paper, he noticed something that made his breath stop. Scratched into the metal toilet paper dispenser, fresh enough that the metal showed bright and unoxidized, were the words, "Help me. Still here. Can't get out." Gerald's hand froze. The scratches looked recent, possibly made within the last few hours. The implication was that someone had been trapped in this stall, unable to escape, and had left a message. But that made no sense. The stall door wasn't locked from the outside. Gerald had simply pushed it open to enter. Anyone inside could leave simply by pushing the door open, unless something was preventing them from leaving, something beyond physical barriers. Gerald stood and turned to exit the stall, pushing on the door. It didn't move. He pushed harder, putting his weight behind it, but the door remained solid and immovable as if welded shut. Panic spiked immediately, his heart rate jumping, adrenaline flooding his system. Gerald threw his shoulder against the door, hitting it with full force, but it didn't budge even a fraction of an inch. He looked down at the gap beneath the door, the space that should have shown the bathroom floor beyond. Instead, the gap showed darkness, absolute darkness, as if the stall was no longer connected to the rest area bathroom but had become isolated in some pocket of space. Gerald dropped to his knees and tried to look through the gap, pressing his face against the filthy floor. The darkness on the other side was complete, no light penetrating, no sense of depth or dimension. He called out, "Hello? Is someone there? I need help. The door is stuck." His voice sounded wrong, muffled and flat, like the stall was soundproofed. No response came from the darkness beyond. Gerald pulled out his cell phone, intending to call for help. The screen showed no signal, which wasn't unusual in concrete bathroom buildings that often blocked reception. But more disturbing, the time display was wrong. His phone showed 2:33 a.m., the exact time he had entered the rest area. Gerald knew he had been in the bathroom for at least 10 minutes, dealing with the door and examining the graffiti. But his phone insisted no time had passed, as if he had become frozen in that moment of entering the stall. He tried the door again, kicking it, hitting it, screaming for help. Nothing changed, the door remaining immovable, the darkness beneath it unchanging. Gerald forced himself to stop and think rationally. There had to be a way out. Bathroom stalls weren't built to be escape-proof. He could climb over the walls, could break the door hinges, could do something physical to escape. He grabbed the top edge of the stall walls, preparing to pull himself up and over. The moment his hands gripped the top of the wall, pain exploded through his palms, a burning sensation like grabbing a hot stove. Gerald yanked his hands back, seeing angry red marks on his skin where he had touched the wall. The paint had somehow burned him, as if the walls themselves were rejecting his attempt to escape. Gerald stared at his blistered palms, his mind struggling to process the impossibility. Paint didn't burn. Metal stall walls didn't generate heat. This wasn't possible. He examined the stall more carefully, looking for any alternative exit. The walls were solid, no gaps or weaknesses visible. The ceiling was acoustic tile, but when Gerald tried to push one tile up to access the space above, the tile wouldn't move, fixed as solidly as if it were concrete. The floor was vinyl tile over concrete, no access panels or drains large enough to escape through. The stall had become a perfect prison, sealed on all sides. Gerald read the graffiti again, this time with growing horror, dozens of names and dates spanning decades. Had all these people been trapped in this stall? Had they all experienced what he was experiencing now, imprisoned by invisible forces in a space that shouldn't be able to hold anyone? What had happened to them? Had they escaped? Or were they still here somehow, their bodies never found, missing persons cases that remained unsolved? He noticed something else about the dates. They weren't random. Every entry was from the 14th of a month, just like today was August 14th. Michael Chen, March 15th, 2003. Wait, that said 15, not 14. Gerald looked more carefully, his eyes adjusting to the harsh fluorescent light. No, it definitely said 15. He checked others. July 22nd, October 31st, dates that weren't the 14th. But then he noticed a pattern in the tally marks, groups of 14 scratches repeated over and over. Counting to 14, marking time in periods of 14 hours maybe, or 14 minutes, or 14 days. Gerald's phone buzzed in his hand, startling him badly. The screen had changed, no longer showing 2:33 a.m., but now displaying a message in text that he hadn't received, words appearing directly on his lock screen. You have been selected for processing. Please remain calm. Removal from standard space-time is temporary. Duration variable based on compliance. Resistance extends duration. Do not attempt to escape. Gerald's blood froze. The message was insane, impossible, but it was right there on his phone screen. Who had sent it? How had it bypassed his lock screen? And what did it mean by processing, by removal from space-time? Gerald typed a response, his burned hands making the action painful. Who are you? What do you want? Let me out of here. He hit send, though he had no signal and no recipient for the message. The response came immediately, text appearing on his screen. We are maintenance. You entered a designated processing area during an active collection window. This rest area bathroom stall has been selected as a removal point for biological sampling. Your physical form will be documented and studied. Process is non-lethal but may be uncomfortable. Estimated duration 14 hours. Please remain calm. 14 hours. 14 like the pattern in the tally marks, like the date. Gerald would be trapped in this impossible stall for 14 hours while some entities calling themselves maintenance, studied him. The casual tone of the messages made it somehow worse, like this was a routine inconvenience rather than an abduction into a space outside normal reality. Gerald tried to respond again, but his phone screen went dark, completely dead despite showing 70% battery moments before. Time passed with agonizing slowness. Gerald had no way to measure it accurately with his phone dead and the stall apparently existing outside normal time. He sat on the closed toilet lid, his burned hands throbbing, and tried to stay calm despite the growing panic. The fluorescent lights never flickered, never changed intensity, maintaining their constant harsh glow. The graffiti on the walls seemed to move sometimes, the names and dates rearranging themselves when Gerald wasn't looking directly at them. New entries appearing that he was certain hadn't been there before. Then the examination began. Gerald felt pressure on his body, like invisible hands pressing against him, probing and measuring. The sensation moved systematically from his feet upward, external pressure that left no marks but felt intensely violating. When the pressure reached his head, Gerald felt something enter his mind, a presence that rifled through his memories like flipping through a book. He experienced fragments of his past flashing before him. His childhood, his first truck, his ex-wife, his daughter's graduation, random moments pulled forward and examined by the intelligence that had trapped him. Gerald screamed, the psychological invasion worse than any physical pain. The presence withdrew from his mind, leaving him gasping and shaking. But the physical examination continued, now focused on his internal organs. Gerald felt his heart, his lungs, his stomach being somehow sensed and catalogued, the presence inside him documenting everything about his biology. The sensation lasted an eternity, though it might have been minutes or hours, time having lost all meaning in the sealed stall. When the examination finally ended, Gerald collapsed onto the floor, too exhausted and traumatized to remain upright. He lay there on the disgusting bathroom tile, beyond caring about hygiene or dignity, and simply existed in a state of numb shock. More time passed, unmeasurable and terrible. Gerald drifted in and out of consciousness, his mind protecting itself by shutting down periodically. Then, without warning, the stall door opened, just swung open freely as if it had never been stuck. Gerald looked up from the floor, seeing the normal rest area bathroom beyond the door, fluorescent lights illuminating sinks and mirrors and the exit. He crawled out of the stall, his body aching and weak, and pulled himself upright using a sink. The mirror showed him looking haggard and pale, but otherwise unchanged. His hands were no longer burned, the blisters and red marks completely gone, as if they had never existed. Gerald stumbled out of the bathroom and into the parking lot. The sky was lighter now, dawn approaching but not yet arrived. He checked the truck stop's external clock, 4:47 a.m. According to the clock, approximately 2 hours and 15 minutes had passed since he entered the rest area at 2:30 a.m. But Gerald's subjective experience had been far longer, many hours of imprisonment and examination compressed into a time span that couldn't contain them. His truck was exactly where he had parked it, undisturbed and normal. Gerald climbed into the cab and immediately drove away, not stopping until he was 50 miles down the highway. Only then did he pull into another rest area and try to process what had happened. His phone was working again, showing the correct time and date, no mysterious messages visible in his text history. Gerald's hands showed no sign of the burns he had received, his body no evidence of the invasive examination. But Gerald knew what he had experienced was real. The graffiti on the walls, the names and dates of others who had been trapped, the message about processing and removal from space-time, the presence that had examined his body and mind. He reported none of it, knowing how insane it would sound, how quickly he would be referred for psychological evaluation. Instead, Gerald completed his delivery to Kansas City, then requested a leave of absence, citing family emergencies. During that leave, Gerald researched the rest area where he had been trapped. He found something disturbing. The rest area had an unusually high number of missing person reports associated with it, people who had stopped there and never arrived at their destinations. The Illinois State Police had investigated multiple times over the years, finding nothing suspicious, attributing the disappearances to coincidence or to people choosing to vanish for personal reasons. But Gerald knew better. The people hadn't vanished voluntarily. They had been selected for processing, trapped in that bathroom stall, examined by something calling itself maintenance. Gerald never stopped at that rest area again, always refueling and using facilities before reaching it or after passing it. He told other truckers to avoid it when he could, claiming the facilities were poorly maintained or unsafe, not explaining the real reason. A few drivers looked at him strangely when he mentioned it, and one old-timer pulled him aside and said quietly, You went into the third stall, didn't you? On the 14th of the month? Yeah, I know about that. Happened to me 12 years ago. Still have nightmares about it. They're using that bathroom for something, studying us, collecting data. Don't know why, don't know who they are, but they've been doing it for decades. Best thing to do is forget about it and never go back. Gerald tried to follow that advice, tried to forget, but the memory wouldn't fade. Sometimes at night he wakes up feeling that pressure again, those invisible hands examining him, that presence rifling through his mind. And every 14th of every month, Gerald makes sure he's nowhere near a rest area, nowhere near public bathrooms, preferring to stop at busy gas stations or truck stops with constant traffic and witnesses. Because he knows that on the 14th, in certain places, the stalls are collecting people for processing, maintaining some quota or study that requires human subjects, and the entities running the program don't care about consent or trauma. They simply perform their maintenance and return their subjects mostly intact, leaving them with memories that will haunt them forever, and knowledge that we share our rest areas with intelligences that view us as specimens worthy of documentation and nothing more. Story 3. The CB Radio Conversation. Leonard Hayes had been a professional trucker for 21 years, running routes primarily along the East Coast between Florida and Maine. On January 9, 2020, he was hauling a load of automotive parts from Jacksonville, Florida to Boston, Massachusetts, taking Interstate 95 north through Georgia and the Carolinas. His truck was a 2018 Kenworth T680 equipped with all modern amenities, including a sophisticated CB radio system that Leonard kept active constantly. The voices of other drivers providing company during long, lonely hours. The winter night was cold, temperatures in the 30s with light rain creating a sheen on the highway that reflected his headlights. Leonard had left Jacksonville around 6 p.m., planning to drive through the night and stop for his mandatory rest period somewhere in Virginia the following morning. He was making excellent time, the late evening traffic being light, and his CB radio played the usual chatter. Drivers discussing weather conditions, traffic accidents, locations of speed traps, and general conversation to pass the time. Leonard occasionally contributed, offering information about road conditions or responding to direct questions, part of the informal community of drivers who shared the highways. Around 1:15 a.m., as Leonard passed through South Carolina near the town of Dillon, his CB radio crackled with a new voice, male and strained with stress. "This is driver 287 requesting immediate assistance. I've had a medical emergency. I think I'm having a heart attack. Northbound I-95, mile marker 181. Please, somebody help me." The voice was frightened and breathless, the kind of genuine distress that couldn't be faked. Leonard immediately responded, keying his handset. "This is Leonard Hayes. I copy your distress call, driver 287. I'm about 7 miles south of your position. I'm calling 911 right now and heading toward you. Can you pull over safely? Are you able to stop your vehicle?" He grabbed his cell phone with his other hand, already dialing emergency services while maintaining his conversation on the CB. The response came back quickly, the voice even more strained. "I've pulled over, mile marker 181, right shoulder. Chest pain is severe, trouble breathing, please hurry." Leonard spoke to the 911 dispatcher, relaying the information and the location, then drove faster, pushing his truck to 75 miles per hour to close the distance quickly. Other voices chimed in on the CB, drivers offering encouragement to the distressed man, some reporting they were also heading toward the location to render aid. Leonard watched his mile markers carefully. 174, 175, 176. He was getting close. Other drivers reported their positions, creating a converging response of multiple trucks all heading toward mile marker 181 to help driver 287. The camaraderie and immediate response made Leonard proud to be part of the trucking community. People who looked out for each other on the lonely highways. Mile marker 180 passed. Leonard slowed slightly, preparing to pull over, his eyes scanning the right shoulder for a stopped truck. Mile marker 181 came into view, and Leonard saw nothing. No truck, no emergency flashers, no vehicle of any kind on the shoulder. He keyed his CB again. "Driver 287, this is Leonard Hayes. I'm at mile marker 181 right now, but I don't see you. Are you sure about your location?" The response came immediately, the voice now sounding odd, less strained and more flat. "I'm right here at mile marker 181, right shoulder. Can't you see me? I can see your lights. You're driving right past me." Leonard checked his mirrors, seeing empty highway behind him. No truck was visible anywhere near mile marker 181. Other drivers began reporting the same thing, multiple vehicles converging on the location and finding no one there. A female voice broke in on the CB, older and weary. "This is Martha Collins. I've been driving for 30 years. You all need to stop responding to driver 287. That's not a real person. That's the ghost call. It happens every year on January 9th. There's no one to help." Her words were met with confusion and denial from several drivers, but Martha continued. "Driver 287 was the call sign of Robert Mitchell. He had a heart attack and died on January 9th, 1992, right around mile marker 181. His distress call went out, but no one reached him in time. Ever since, his call replays on the anniversary and drivers respond. But there's never anyone there because he's been dead for 28 years. Leonard felt his skin crawl. The voice on the CB had sounded completely genuine, the distress real, the need for help urgent. But according to Martha, it was a recording or an echo or a ghost, something that replayed annually and drew in drivers who thought they were responding to a real emergency. Leonard was about to dismiss it as nonsense when the voice of driver 287 came through again, and this time it sounded different, aware and angry. "You left me to die, all of you. You were too far away, too slow, too late. I called for help and no one came in time. I died alone on the side of the highway, clutching my chest, knowing help was coming but wouldn't arrive before my heart gave out. And now I call every year, and every year drivers respond, and every year I see you all drive past, seeing nothing, unable to help, just like that night. You're all too late. Always too late." The rage and bitterness in the voice made Leonard's hands tighten on the wheel. Other drivers were silent on the CB, no one knowing how to respond to the accusation from a dead man. Then Leonard's radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't driver 287's voice. It was his own voice, Leonard's voice, but saying things he wasn't saying, words he wasn't speaking. "This is Leonard Hayes. I'm having a medical emergency. I think I'm having a heart attack. Northbound I-95, mile marker 201. Please, somebody help me." Leonard's blood turned to ice. His own voice was broadcasting a distress call from a location he hadn't reached yet, reporting an emergency that hadn't happened. He tried to speak into the CB to tell everyone the broadcast wasn't really him, but when he keyed the handset, no sound emerged. His radio was transmitting the false distress call on repeat, his voice pleading for help, while Leonard sat healthy and horrified in his cab, unable to stop the broadcast. Other drivers began responding, promising to help, reporting their positions, converging on mile marker 201. Leonard accelerated, racing to reach that mile marker before the other drivers did, needing to prove he was fine, that the distress call was fake. But as he drove, his chest began to hurt. A dull ache started behind his sternum, radiating outward, pressure building like someone was sitting on his ribcage. Leonard's breathing became labored, each inhale requiring effort. "No," Leonard thought desperately, "this isn't real. This is psychological, stress-induced, not an actual heart attack." But the pain intensified, becoming sharp and vicious, and Leonard's left arm went numb, textbook symptoms of cardiac arrest. He was experiencing the very emergency his voice was broadcasting, his body manifesting the distress call as if the radio had the power to make its words true. Leonard grabbed his cell phone, trying to dial 911 himself, but his fingers wouldn't work properly. The numbness spreading from his arm into his hand. The phone slipped from his grip and fell into the footwell out of reach. Leonard tried to pull over to stop the truck safely, but the pain was overwhelming now. His vision darkening at the edges, his heart rhythm becoming irregular and weak. He managed to guide the truck onto the shoulder near mile marker 199, close but not quite to the mile marker 201 his radio voice had announced. Leonard activated his hazard lights and tried to open the door, thinking if he could get outside, wave down help, someone would see him and stop. But his body wouldn't obey, muscles weak and uncoordinated, and Leonard slumped in the driver's seat, consciousness fading. Through the encroaching darkness, Leonard heard his CB radio continuing to broadcast. But now it wasn't his voice anymore, it was driver 287's voice, Robert Mitchell's voice, and it was laughing. "Now you understand. Now you know what it's like to call for help and have no one arrive in time. Welcome to the highway, Leonard. Welcome to the eternal drive where the distress calls never end and the help never comes." Leonard's last thought before losing consciousness was a prayer that someone would find him, that unlike Robert Mitchell, he would be reached in time, that this wouldn't be his final moment on a dark highway with only a ghost for company. His eyes closed, his breathing stopped, and Leonard Hayes died at 1:47 a.m. on January 9, 2020, on Interstate 95 in South Carolina near mile marker 199. But death wasn't the end. Leonard opened his eyes to find himself still in his truck, still driving, the highway stretching ahead into darkness. His chest no longer hurt, his breathing was normal, but something was fundamentally wrong. Leonard checked his CB radio and heard his own voice broadcasting. "This is Leonard Hayes. I'm having a medical emergency. I think I'm having a heart attack. Northbound I-95, mile marker 201. Please, somebody help me." Leonard tried to respond, tried to tell the responding drivers not to come, that it was too late, but his voice wouldn't work. He was trapped in the loop now, forever broadcasting his final distress call, forever dying on the highway, forever joining the chorus of dead drivers whose emergency calls echo across the CB frequencies on the anniversaries of their deaths, drawing in living drivers and spreading the curse to new victims. Every January 9th, now drivers on Interstate 95 in South Carolina report hearing two distress calls. Driver 287 at mile marker 181 and Leonard Hayes at mile marker 201. Both sound genuine, both trigger immediate response from helpful drivers who race to the locations only to find nothing, no one, just empty highway. And every January 9th, one of those responding drivers will begin to feel chest pain, will hear their own voice broadcasting a distress call from a mile marker ahead, and will join the growing number of ghost drivers whose final moments replay eternally, teaching new victims what it means to die alone on the highway, calling for help that arrives too late or never arrives at all, trapped in the last desperate minutes of life that extend into an eternity of repeated death and futile rescue calls that no one can answer. Story 4. The Truck Stop Shower. Vincent Shaw had been driving commercial trucks for 19 years, hauling various cargo across the southern United States. On July 23, 2016, he was transporting a load of industrial equipment from Houston, Texas to Atlanta, Georgia, running Interstate 10 east through Louisiana. His truck was a 2014 International ProStar with over 480,000 miles on the odometer, well-maintained and reliable. The summer night was hot and humid, temperatures still in the mid-80s even after midnight, and Vincent was looking forward to a shower and some rest at the next major truck stop. Around 2 a.m., Vincent pulled into a large truck stop near Lafayette, Louisiana, a facility he had used dozens of times before. The truck stop was busy even at this late hour, commercial vehicles parked in neat rows, drivers coming and going from the main building where showers, food, and supplies were available. Vincent found a parking space, grabbed his shower kit and change of clothes, and walked into the building, paying the attendant for a shower token and waiting in the driver's lounge for his number to be called. The shower facilities were typical for truck stops. Small private rooms with a shower, toilet, and sink, reasonably clean and functional if not luxurious. When Vincent's number was announced over the PA system, he was assigned to shower room 12 down the hallway on the left. Vincent walked down the corridor, passing other shower rooms with their numbered doors, and found room 12 at the end of the hall. The door was unlocked, standing slightly ajar, and Vincent pushed it open and entered. The room looked normal initially, white tile walls, a shower head mounted on the wall, a toilet in the corner, a small sink with a mirror above it. Vincent locked the door behind him, hung his clean clothes on the hook, and started the shower, waiting for the water to warm up. Steam began filling the room as the hot water ran, and Vincent undressed, stepping under the stream and enjoying the sensation of washing away the sweat and grime of hours behind the wheel. As Vincent shampooed his hair, eyes closed against the soap, he heard something that made him pause. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, walking around the shower room. But that was impossible. Vincent was alone. The door was locked and the room was too small for someone to hide in. He opened his eyes, rinsing the shampoo quickly, and looked around the steamy space. Nothing. No one. Just the empty shower room. Vincent attributed the sound to his imagination or to noise from adjacent rooms and continued washing. Then he heard it again, unmistakably footsteps accompanied by breathing, heavy and wet like someone with fluid in their lungs. The sounds were close, right outside the shower curtain that Vincent had pulled closed for privacy and warmth. Vincent's heart rate spiked, adrenaline flooding his system. He pulled the curtain aside quickly, looking into the room. Empty, completely empty. No one there. But the breathing continued, and now Vincent noticed something else. Wet footprints on the tile floor, appearing one after another in a path that circled the shower room as if an invisible person was walking around him. Vincent backed against the shower wall, his mind racing through possibilities. Hallucination? Carbon monoxide from his truck exhaust somehow affecting his cognition? But the footprints were real, visible, water pooling in the shape of feet and toes on the white tile. And the breathing was real, audible over the sound of the running shower, rasping and labored and entirely too close. Then Vincent saw the mirror beginning to fog over with steam, which was normal, but words were forming in the condensation, written by an invisible finger. "Get out now." The letters were crude but unmistakable, a warning written in real time as Vincent watched. His survival instincts overrode his confusion, and Vincent grabbed his clothes without dressing, clutched them to his chest, and lunged for the door. The door handle wouldn't turn. Vincent twisted it desperately, pulled and pushed, but the lock wouldn't disengage. He was trapped in the shower room with something invisible that left wet footprints and wrote warnings in mirror condensation. Vincent pounded on the door, shouting for help, his wet fists thudding against the metal. No response came from the hallway. No attendant arrived to investigate the noise, as if the entire truck stop had gone deaf. The breathing behind him grew louder, closer, and Vincent turned to face whatever was in the room with him. He saw nothing, but he felt something. A presence. A consciousness focusing on him with intentions he couldn't read. The shower water, which had been running clear, turned rust brown, then darker, becoming red like diluted blood. The smell changed too, from soap and steam to something organic and rotten, like meat left in the sun. Vincent screamed, genuine terror overwhelming his ability to remain calm. He threw himself at the door, hitting it with his shoulder, trying to break it down. The door was solid, reinforced, and didn't budge. Vincent was trapped, locked in with an invisible entity and water that ran red with blood that shouldn't exist. He backed into the corner farthest from the shower, clutching his clothes like a shield, his eyes wide and fixed on the empty space where the breathing originated. Then the entity spoke, a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere, wet and gurgling like someone speaking through fluid-filled lungs. "You're in my room. This is where I died. They found me 3 days later. Heart attack in the shower, fell and hit my head, drowned in an inch of bloody water while drivers walked past outside, ignoring my screams because they thought I was just singing or talking to myself. No one came. No one helped. I died alone in this shower room while people were 20 feet away." Vincent's mind processed the impossible information. He was being haunted by someone who had died in this shower room, a driver who had suffered a medical emergency and died alone while help was nearby but unaware. And now that driver's ghost was replaying its death or forcing Vincent to experience it, or simply expressing its eternal rage at dying unnoticed and unaided. The water level in the shower began rising, not flowing down the drain but pooling on the floor, spreading across the tile toward Vincent's corner. The water was still red, still smelling of decay, and it was rising faster than seemed possible from a single shower head. Within minutes, the water was ankle deep, then calf deep, the liquid warm and viscous like actual blood. Vincent tried to climb, putting his feet on the toilet, standing on the tank, anything to get above the rising water. But the water kept coming, impossibly vast amounts of it filling the small shower room. Vincent found himself pressed against the ceiling, the water rising to his chest, his neck, his chin. He tilted his head back, gasping for the last few inches of air trapped against the ceiling tiles. The voice spoke again, satisfied and victorious. "Now you know. Now you understand. This is what it's like to drown alone while help is close but doesn't come. Every night I relive it, and sometimes I bring someone else in to share it, to witness it, so I'm not alone anymore in this moment." The water covered Vincent's face and he was drowning. His lungs burning for air, his body convulsing as it fought for oxygen that wasn't there. His vision darkened, consciousness fading, and Vincent Shaw died in shower room 12 at a truck stop near Lafayette, Louisiana, drowned in impossible blood water that filled a locked room while drivers walked past outside, unaware of the horror happening 20 feet away. Except Vincent didn't die. He opened his eyes to find himself standing in the shower room, dry, dressed, the water shut off, and the room completely normal. No blood, no flooding, no entity. Vincent's hands shook as he checked himself, finding he was wearing his clean clothes, fully dressed, his skin dry as if he had never showered at all. His dirty clothes were in his bag, and the shower room was pristine and empty. Vincent unlocked the door easily, the handle turning without resistance, and stumbled into the hallway. The attendant looked up as Vincent passed the front desk, concern crossing her face. "You okay, driver? You look pale." Vincent managed to nod, unable to speak, and walked quickly to his truck. He sat in the cab for an hour, shaking, trying to convince himself it had been a hallucination or a dream. But Vincent knew it had been real. The drowning sensation was too vivid, the entity's voice too clear, the experience too complete to be dismissed as imagination. Vincent researched the truck stop later, looking for any history of deaths in the shower facilities. He found a brief news article from 2008. Truck driver found dead in shower room. The article identified the victim as Harold Thompson, age 56, who had suffered a heart attack and fallen in the shower, drowning in the pooled water before being discovered by a cleaning attendant 3 days later. Harold Thompson had died in shower room 12, the same room where Vincent had experienced his drowning. And according to the article, Thompson had been alive for some time after falling, his autopsy showing he had drowned rather than dying immediately from the heart attack. He had been conscious, aware, unable to get help, slowly dying while drivers used the adjacent facilities and walked past his door, never knowing someone was dying just feet away. Vincent never used that truck stop again, always refueling and showering elsewhere, even if it meant driving additional miles. He warned other drivers when he could, though most dismissed his warnings as paranoia or superstition. But a few drivers, the ones who had been on the road long enough to experience the unexplainable, listened and nodded and added that truck stop to their own list of places to avoid. Because shower room 12 at the truck stop near Lafayette, Louisiana remains active. Still assigned to drivers who pay for shower tokens, still appearing normal and functional. And sometimes late at night when the facility is busy and the attendants are distracted, a driver enters room 12 and never comes out, vanishing completely, no body ever found, no explanation ever provided. The room is found empty and clean, no signs of struggle or foul play, just another missing person case that goes unsolved. And Harold Thompson's ghost waits in that shower room, reliving his death nightly, sometimes drowning alone and sometimes pulling in a companion to share those final terrible moments, ensuring he's never alone in the dying again, that someone witnesses his end and understands what it means to call for help that never arrives, to drown in inches of water while life and people and potential rescue exist just beyond a door that might as well be miles away, for all the good it does. Story 5. The Cargo Door. Melissa Grant had been driving commercial trucks for 14 years, specializing in refrigerated transport across the western United States. On March 17, 2019, she was hauling a load of frozen meat from Omaha, Nebraska to Seattle, Washington, taking Interstate 90 west through South Dakota, Wyoming, and Montana. Her truck was a 2017 Freightliner Cascadia with a state-of-the-art refrigeration unit capable of maintaining precise temperatures. The early spring night was cold, temperatures near freezing with light snow falling intermittently. Melissa had loaded the cargo herself in Omaha, standard procedure for refrigerated goods to ensure proper temperature maintenance from the start. The pallets of frozen meat were stacked securely, the trailer doors sealed and locked, the refrigeration unit set to maintain -10 degrees Fahrenheit. Everything was routine, professional, exactly as Melissa had done hundreds of times before. Around 11:30 p.m., as Melissa crossed into Montana near the Wyoming border, she felt her truck handle differently. A subtle change in the weight distribution that suggested the cargo had shifted. This was concerning but not unprecedented. Sometimes loads settled during transport even when properly secured. Melissa decided to stop at the next rest area and check the cargo, ensuring nothing had come loose that might damage the goods or affect the truck's stability. The rest area appeared 15 minutes later, a small facility with minimal lighting and only 2 other vehicles present. Melissa parked, grabbed her flashlight, and walked around to the rear of the trailer. The cargo doors were still sealed, the lock intact, exactly as they should be. But Melissa noticed something odd. Scratch marks on the inside of the doors, visible through the small gap at the bottom where the doors met the trailer floor. The scratches were fresh, bright metal showing through the paint, and they were extensive, covering the inside surface of the doors in frantic patterns. Melissa's first thought was that an animal had somehow gotten into the trailer before loading, perhaps a raccoon or stray cat, and was now trapped inside trying to escape. That would explain the shifted weight sensation, an animal moving around among the cargo. Melissa felt guilty immediately, knowing if an animal was trapped it would already be dead from the sub-zero temperatures, frozen solid in the -10-degree environment. She unlocked the cargo doors and pulled them open, shining her flashlight into the trailer. The pallets of frozen meat were stacked exactly as she had left them, secured with straps, no signs of shifting or disturbance. And no animal was visible, no body frozen on the floor. Nothing that explained the fresh scratch marks on the inside of the doors. Melissa climbed into the trailer, careful to leave the doors propped open so she wouldn't accidentally lock herself in, and inspected the cargo more carefully. Everything appeared secure, the refrigeration unit humming steadily. The temperature gauge reading -9 degrees, well within acceptable range. Melissa examined the scratch marks more closely, shining her light directly on them. They were definitely fresh, some of the scratches showing no oxidation at all, suggesting they had been made within the last few hours. And the pattern was disturbing. Not random scraping, but deliberate marks that almost looked like letters or symbols. Some primitive attempt at communication. Melissa felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise as she studied the scratches. Were those letters? An R, maybe a T, definitely an H and an E and an L and a P. Help. Someone or something had scratched help on the inside of the cargo doors. But that was impossible. Melissa had loaded the trailer herself, had been driving continuously since Omaha, had checked her seals at every fuel stop. No one could have gotten into the trailer without her knowing. Then Melissa heard breathing, slow and labored, coming from deeper in the trailer among the pallets. Her blood froze. Someone was in the trailer, had been in the trailer since Omaha, had survived hours in sub-zero temperatures somehow, and was still alive despite conditions that should have caused death from hypothermia within 30 minutes. Melissa backed toward the trailer doors, her flashlight beam sweeping across the cargo, trying to locate the source of the breathing. Movement caught her eye, a shadow shifting between pallets, something human-shaped but moving wrong, jerky and uncoordinated like a puppet with tangled strings. Melissa's survival instinct screamed at her to run, to get out of the trailer immediately, but her humanitarian impulses demanded she help whoever was trapped in the freezing cargo. She called out, her voice shaking. "Hello? Are you okay? I'm going to get help. Just hold on." The shadow moved toward her, shambling between the pallets, and as it entered the beam of her flashlight, Melissa saw what had been surviving in her trailer. It was human-shaped but wrong in every detail. The skin was blue-gray, frozen flesh that cracked and split with movement, revealing frozen tissue beneath. The eyes were white, corneas frozen solid, but the thing was looking at her, tracking her movement despite having no functional eyes. The mouth hung open, jaw dislocated and frozen, and the breathing sound came from somewhere inside the chest, a mechanical wheezing that shouldn't be possible from frozen lungs. Melissa scrambled backward, fell out of the trailer, and landed hard on the pavement. The thing followed, moving toward the trailer doors with slow determination. Melissa saw its hands, fingers frozen into claws, nails torn and bloody from scratching at the doors. This was what had made the marks, this frozen corpse that moved and breathed despite being physiologically dead, killed by the cold but animated by something else, something that wouldn't let it stop despite the body's complete failure. The thing reached the trailer doors and tried to speak, the frozen mouth unable to form words but sounds emerging anyway, distorted and horrible. "Cold, so cold, help me." The voice was pain and desperation stretched across syllables, a consciousness trapped in a body that had frozen solid but continued functioning somehow, a nightmare of flesh that wouldn't die despite every reason it should. Melissa ran, sprinting toward her truck cab, but before she could reach it, her foot caught on ice, and she fell again, her head hitting the pavement hard enough to daze her. Through blurred vision, she saw the frozen thing shambling toward her, arms outstretched, that terrible wheezing breath getting closer. Melissa tried to crawl away, but her body wouldn't respond properly, the impact having stunned her nervous system. The frozen thing reached her and touched her arm. The cold was instant and agonizing, burning through her jacket and shirt, freezing her skin on contact. Melissa screamed, pulling away, but her arm where the thing had touched her was already turning blue-gray, frozen solid in seconds, the flesh dying as ice crystals formed in her cells. The thing spoke again, clearer now. Can't warm up, can't thaw, stuck like this, frozen forever, need warmth, need your warmth, give me your warmth. Melissa understood with horror what the thing intended. It would freeze her, transfer its cold into her body, steal her warmth and leave her in the same state it occupied, a frozen corpse that couldn't die, trapped in a body that was dead but animated, feeling everything but unable to stop the nightmare. The thing touched her again, its frozen fingers gripping her shoulder, and Melissa felt the cold spreading, her chest going numb, her heart struggling to pump blood that was beginning to freeze. Then headlights swept across the rest area, another truck pulling in. The frozen thing released Melissa and shambled back toward the trailer, moving with surprising speed, climbing inside and disappearing among the pallets. Melissa tried to call out, to warn the other driver, but her voice wouldn't work, her throat frozen, her lungs struggling to draw air. The other driver, a man in his 50s, walked over and found Melissa on the ground. He called 911 immediately, reporting a driver down, possible medical emergency. Melissa was rushed to a hospital in Billings, Montana, treated for severe hypothermia despite having been outside for less than 5 minutes in temperatures above freezing. The doctors couldn't explain it. Her core body temperature was dangerously low, her arm showing signs of severe frostbite, as if she had been exposed to sub-zero temperatures for an extended period. Melissa tried to explain what happened, describing the frozen thing in her trailer, but the hospital staff attributed her account to hallucinations from hypothermia. Police investigated her truck and cargo, finding nothing unusual, no stowaway, no frozen corpse, just pallets of meat maintained at proper temperature. The scratch marks on the cargo doors were noted in the report but attributed to normal wear or vandalism at some previous time. Melissa's arm required partial amputation, 3 fingers lost to frostbite, the tissue having frozen so severely it became necrotic despite the best efforts of the medical team. She was put on disability leave, unable to drive commercially with her injured hand, and she spent months in physical therapy trying to recover function. During that time, Melissa researched her cargo, trying to understand what had been in her trailer. She found something disturbing. The meat processing facility where she had loaded her cargo had been investigated 3 years earlier for workplace safety violations after a worker had fallen into a blast freezer and died before being discovered. The worker's body had been frozen solid, and according to witness statements, when the body was found, there were fresh scratch marks inside the freezer door, suggesting the worker had been alive and trying to escape for some time before death occurred. The worker's name was David Reeves, and photos from the incident report showed his body in the state Melissa had described. Blue-gray skin, frozen solid, jaw dislocated from screaming, fingers torn and bloody from clawing at the locked door. David Reeves had frozen to death over the course of several hours, trapped in sub-zero temperatures, experiencing every moment of his body shutting down, while consciousness persisted far longer than it should have. Melissa came to believe that David Reeves's ghost, or his frozen corpse animated by his dying consciousness, now haunted the refrigerated trailers loaded at that facility, trapped in an eternal state of freezing to death, reliving those terrible hours in the blast freezer and seeking warmth from living people to temporarily relieve the agony. She contacted the facility, warning them about the phenomenon, but they dismissed her concerns as trauma-induced delusions. Melissa never drove refrigerated cargo again, the psychological trauma and physical injury making it impossible for her to even approach a refrigerated trailer without panic attacks. She transferred to dry goods transport eventually, but she warned every refrigerated driver she met about trailers loaded at that Omaha facility, describing what to watch for. scratch marks on cargo doors, sensations of shifted weight, sounds of breathing from empty trailers. Most drivers dismissed her warnings, but a few took them seriously, and those few shared stories of their own experiences. Feeling watched while checking refrigerated cargo, hearing scratching inside sealed trailers, seeing frost patterns on trailer walls that looked like handprints or faces. The refrigerated trucking community has a high turnover rate, drivers leaving the profession after disturbing experiences they can't explain and won't discuss. And David Reeves continues to freeze, trapped in an eternal death that spans moments and lifetimes simultaneously. His consciousness bound to the last cargo he processed before falling into the blast freezer. Traveling across the country in refrigerated trailers, seeking warmth from drivers who open the doors and find themselves face to face with the frozen horror inside, experiencing his cold spreading into their bodies, feeling what it's like to freeze solid while still alive, still conscious, still desperately trying to escape the cold that never stops, never warms, never releases its victims into the mercy of actual death. Story 6. The Fuel Stop Attendant. Robert Carlson had been a professional trucker for 24 years, one of the most senior drivers at his company. On November 11, 2014, he was hauling a load of electronics from Los Angeles, California to Denver, Colorado, taking Interstate 15 north through Nevada and Utah. His truck was a 2012 Peterbilt 387 with over 700,000 miles on the odometer, the highest mileage vehicle in the company's fleet. The autumn night was clear and cold, temperatures dropping into the 20s as Robert climbed in elevation through the Nevada desert. Around 3:30 a.m., Robert's fuel gauge was approaching empty and he began watching for fuel stations. This stretch of highway was remote, with long distances between services, and Robert knew he needed to fuel soon or risk running out in a location where help would be difficult to reach. A sign appeared announcing fuel at the next exit, and Robert took the off-ramp, following the road toward what appeared to be an older independent truck stop rather than a modern chain facility. The truck stop was small, maybe 4 pumps, with a single building that housed the payment counter and presumably some basic supplies. The lighting was poor, just a few overhead lights that cast more shadow than illumination, and the pavement was cracked and weathered. But fuel was fuel, and Robert needed it. He pulled up to one of the diesel pumps and killed his engine, climbing down from the cab with his credit card. The building door was locked, which was odd for a 24-hour facility. Robert peered through the grimy window and saw lights on inside, suggesting someone was present. He knocked on the glass, and after a moment, a figure emerged from the back room and approached the door. The person was male, middle-aged, wearing a grease-stained work shirt with a name patch that read, Earl. He unlocked the door and pushed it open, looking at Robert with an expression that was blank and somehow off. "Need fuel," Robert said, stating the obvious. Earl nodded slowly, his movements mechanical and delayed, and gestured toward the pumps. "Prepay inside. Cash only. Systems down." His voice was flat, emotionless, and his eyes didn't quite focus on Robert, looking slightly to the side as if tracking something invisible. Robert found this mildly concerning but not alarming enough to leave. He pulled out his wallet and counted his cash, finding he had about $300, enough to fill his tanks. He handed Earl $200 and said, "Pump 3, diesel, fill it up." Earl took the money, his fingers cold and slightly damp when they brushed Robert's palm, and walked to an old mechanical register that looked like it dated from the 1970s. As Earl processed the payment, Robert looked around the interior of the building. The shelves were stocked with products, but everything looked dated, brands he didn't recognize or that had been discontinued years ago, packaging designs from decades past. A calendar on the wall showed November 1987, 27 years out of date. Robert felt unease creeping up his spine, the accumulating oddities suggesting something was fundamentally wrong with this place. Earl turned back to Robert and held out a pump authorization slip, the kind of paper receipt that old pumps used to print before digital displays became standard. Pump 3 activated. Fill your tank. Robert took the slip, noting that Earl's skin was grayish, unhealthy looking, and the name patch on his shirt while reading Earl was stitched with thread that looked rotted and degraded. Robert walked back to his truck, trying to shake off his growing anxiety. He was tired, probably imagining problems where none existed. He inserted the pump nozzle into his tank and activated the fuel flow, watching the mechanical numbers on the old-style pump tick upward as diesel flowed into his tank. The fuel smelled wrong, too thick and chemical, not quite right for diesel, but Robert attributed it to being stored in old underground tanks that might have contamination or additive breakdown. As his tank filled, Robert noticed movement in the truck stop building. Through the window, he could see Earl standing motionless behind the counter, not moving at all, just staring straight ahead at nothing. Not moving like a person resting or waiting, but not moving like a statue or a corpse, absolutely frozen in position. Robert watched for over a minute, and Earl didn't shift, didn't blink, didn't breathe that Robert could detect from this distance. The pump clicked off, indicating a full tank. Robert replaced the nozzle and checked the pump display. $200 exactly, every penny of the prepayment used. That was unusually precise. The odds of filling a tank to exactly the prepaid amount were astronomically low. Robert walked back to the building to get his receipt, pushing through the door and finding Earl still standing in the same position, unmoving. "Earl?" Robert said cautiously. "I need a receipt." Earl's head turned toward Robert, the movement jerky and too fast, like a film with frames missing. His eyes, when they focused on Robert, were completely black, no whites visible, just solid black orbs that reflected the overhead lights. Earl's mouth opened and his voice came out layered and distorted, multiple voices speaking simultaneously. "You took the fuel. Now you owe the toll. Fuel isn't free on this road. Nothing is free on this road. You pay with distance. You pay with time. You pay with years." Robert backed toward the door, his hand reaching for the handle, but Earl moved faster than should be possible, crossing the distance between them in an instant and grabbing Robert's wrist. The cold was shocking, like Earl's hand was made of ice or meat pulled from a freezer. Earl pulled Robert closer, and Robert saw that Earl's skin was wrong, desiccated and preserved like a mummy, the flesh dried and leathery beneath the work shirt. "This truck stop closed in 1987, Earl said in that horrible multi-voice tone. "I died here in 1987. Heart attack alone on a November night just like this one. Took 3 days for someone to find my body. The place was already failing, no customers, no business. I died behind this counter and nobody knew for 72 hours. Now I'm stuck here running the pumps for drivers who don't realize they've stopped somewhere that doesn't exist anymore. And when they take fuel from a dead station, they owe a toll. Time for distance, years, for miles." Robert pulled free, Earl's grip releasing unexpectedly, and stumbled toward the door. He burst out into the parking lot and ran to his truck, climbing into the cab and starting the engine with shaking hands. The diesel engine turned over, caught and roared to life, and Robert threw the transmission into gear, accelerating away from the truck stop without looking back. He drove for 10 miles before he felt safe enough to check his mirrors. The truck stop was gone, no lights visible behind him, no structure at all where it should have been. Robert pulled over at a well-lit rest area and tried to calm his racing heart. He checked his fuel gauge, full, exactly as it should be after fueling. Whatever he had experienced, his truck had genuinely been refueled. The diesel was real even if the station wasn't. Robert examined himself in the mirror, checking for any signs of injury from Earl's grip. His wrist showed bruising, finger-shaped marks already darkening on his skin. But something else was wrong. Something Robert couldn't immediately identify. He looked older, his face more lined, his hair grayer than it had been. Robert pulled out his driver's license to check his photo, to compare his current appearance to how he had looked. The birth date on his license was wrong. Instead of showing he was 52 years old, the license now indicated he was 75, 23 years older than he should be. Robert's hands shook as he checked the date on his phone. November 11th, 2014, correct. But according to his license, he had been born in 1939, not 1962. He had aged 23 years in the time it took to fuel his truck and interact with Earl's ghost. Robert called his wife, needing to hear her voice, needing confirmation of reality. She answered after several rings, her voice thick with sleep. "Robert, what's wrong? It's almost 4 in the morning." Robert tried to explain, but his words came out confused and disjointed. His wife's concern grew, and she made him promise to stop driving and get some rest, to see a doctor if he felt unwell. Robert completed his delivery to Denver, but he reported sick immediately afterward and went to a medical facility for evaluation. The doctors were confused by his appearance, noting that he looked significantly older than his stated age, but all medical tests came back normal for a man in his 70s, not his 50s. Robert's company forced him into early retirement, citing health concerns and appearance issues that suggested he was no longer fit for commercial driving. Robert researched the fuel stop, trying to find records of the location and of Earl. He found historical records of a small independent truck stop at that exit that had operated through the 1970s and 1980s before closing in 1987. The owner-operator, Earl Simmons, had been found dead behind the counter 3 days after suffering a heart attack, his body already decomposing when a supplier making a delivery discovered him. The truck stop had been demolished in 1989, the property reverting to desert, no structures remaining. But Robert had fueled there in 2014 at a truck stop that had been gone for 25 years, purchasing diesel from a man who had been dead for 27 years, and paying for that fuel with decades of his life, aging 23 years in the span of 15 minutes. Robert tried to contact other drivers, warning them about the phantom fuel stop, but no one would listen, dismissing his story as the delusions of someone experiencing early-onset dementia. Robert died in 2019, 5 years after the encounter. His body aged to match the 98 years his falsified license claimed he had lived. The doctors listed his cause of death as natural causes consistent with advanced age, but Robert's wife knew better. Her husband had been murdered by a ghost at a fuel stop that shouldn't exist, killed by trading years of life for gallons of diesel, paying a toll to Earl Simmons, who would never rest, who would continue operating his defunct truck stop through eternity, fueling drivers who didn't realize they were stopping at a place between existence and absence, where diesel costs not dollars but time, where filling a tank empties the years from a life, and where every gallon purchased brings death closer, aging drivers decades and minutes until the toll is fully paid, and another victim joins Earl in operating the phantom station, forever trapped, forever fueling, forever collecting tolls from travelers who make the mistake of stopping at an exit that should be empty but isn't, that should be closed but opens for those desperate enough or unlucky, enough to need fuel in the deepest, darkest hours when the boundary between what exists and what used to exist becomes thin enough that the dead can sell the living fuel extracted from time itself. Story 7. The Overpass Shadow. Catherine Wells had been driving commercial trucks for 11 years, running routes primarily through the Midwest. On September 9, 2021, she was hauling a load of furniture from Indianapolis, Indiana to Minneapolis, Minnesota, taking Interstate 65 north through Indiana into Illinois. Her truck was a 2019 Volvo VNL 860 with every modern safety feature, including collision avoidance and adaptive cruise control. The September night was mild, temperatures in the 60s with clear skies and good visibility. Catherine was making excellent time, running ahead of her delivery schedule. Around midnight, as Catherine drove through rural Indiana, she began noticing a pattern that seemed odd. Every overpass she drove under, approximately one every 5 miles, had a shadow standing at the edge, visible for just a moment in her headlights before the truck passed beneath the structure. Catherine thought initially it was just debris or perhaps road workers, but as the pattern continued, overpass after overpass, each with a shadow figure standing at the edge, she realized something else was happening. The figures weren't moving, weren't reacting to her truck's approach, just standing motionless at the edge of each overpass, looking down at the highway. Catherine felt increasing unease as she passed the 10th, 11th, 12th overpass, each with its sentinel shadow. She grabbed her CB radio and called out, "This is Catherine Wells, northbound I-65 in Indiana. Is anybody else seeing figures on the overpasses? Every single overpass has someone standing on it. Are these workers? Is there some kind of maintenance happening?" Responses came back confused and negative. Other drivers on the highway reported seeing no figures, no people on overpasses, no maintenance activity. One driver specifically said, "Catherine, I just passed under the same overpasses you're describing. There's nobody there. You okay? You sound spooked." Catherine insisted she was seeing them, clear as day in her headlights, but the other driver's denials made her question her own perception. Then Catherine approached another overpass, and this time, as her headlights illuminated the structure, the shadow figure at the edge moved. It leaned forward, its body angling out over the highway, and then it fell or jumped, dropping from the overpass directly toward Catherine's windshield. Catherine screamed, her hands jerking the wheel instinctively, but the figure passed through her truck without impact, a shadow without substance, and was gone. Catherine's heart hammered in her chest as she checked her mirrors. The highway behind her was empty, no body on the pavement, no evidence of anyone falling from the overpass. But Catherine had seen it. Clearly, a human-shaped figure dropping from the structure and passing through her truck like it wasn't there. Or like the figure wasn't there, wasn't solid, wasn't real in any physical sense. The next overpass approached, and Catherine slowed her truck to 40 miles per hour, dreading what she would see. Another shadow figure stood at the edge, and as Catherine's truck neared, it jumped, falling toward her windshield, passing through the truck without impact or sound. The next overpass, the same thing happened, and the next, and the next. Every overpass now had a jumping shadow, figures that threw themselves from the structures into her path, passing through her truck in silent repetition. Catherine was crying now, her hands shaking on the wheel, unable to process what she was experiencing. She called her dispatcher, breaking protocol to use her cell phone while driving, and tried to explain. The dispatcher, a woman named Sarah who had known Catherine for years, listened with growing concern and instructed Catherine to pull over immediately, to stop driving, to wait for emergency services. But Catherine couldn't stop, couldn't pull over because something was compelling her to continue forward, to keep driving under the overpasses, to witness each jumping shadow. Her truck's adaptive cruise control activated itself despite Catherine's foot on the accelerator, taking over the speed regulation and holding the truck at exactly 65 miles per hour. Catherine tried to disengage it, but the controls wouldn't respond. She tried to slow manually, pressing the brake, but the pedal had no effect, the truck maintaining its speed regardless of her input. Catherine was trapped in a vehicle that was driving itself, carrying her under overpass after overpass, each with its jumping shadow that fell and passed through her windshield in a terrible repeating sequence. Then Catherine noticed something else. The shadows were getting darker, more substantial, as if they were becoming more real with each repetition. The first shadows had been barely visible, faint gray shapes. Now they were dark enough to block out the lights of the overpass structures briefly as they fell, solid enough to create the illusion of actual mass. And with each jump, Catherine felt something. A cold sensation like a draft passing through the cab, bringing with it an emotional residue of despair and finality. These were people, Catherine realized. Or they had been people. These were shadows of jumpers, people who had thrown themselves from overpasses into traffic, choosing to end their lives by falling in front of vehicles. And every time a truck drove under these overpasses after midnight, the shadows reenacted their deaths, falling again and again, forever trapped in the moment of their final decision, their final action, unable to complete the death because they were already dead. Just shadows now, echoes of suicide that played out eternally for drivers, unlucky enough to see them. Catherine's phone rang, her dispatcher calling back, but Catherine couldn't answer, couldn't take her eyes off the road and the approaching overpasses. The shadows were solid now, completely opaque, and when they fell through her windshield, they left behind emotional imprints that Catherine absorbed involuntarily. She felt their despair, their hopelessness, their conviction that death was the only escape from pain. The cumulative emotional weight was crushing. Dozens of jumpers' final feelings pouring into Catherine's mind, filling her with an overwhelming desire to join them, to stop fighting, to end the pain. Catherine's hands moved toward the steering wheel, ready to jerk it hard and send her truck off the road, to crash and end everything. To stop the terrible parade of jumping shadows by becoming one herself. But some core of her resisted, some survival instinct that refused to surrender to the imposed despair. Catherine screamed, a wordless roar of defiance, and grabbed her emergency brake handle, yanking it hard. The truck's air brakes engaged with a hissing scream, the vehicle decelerating rapidly despite the adaptive cruise control's attempts to maintain speed. The truck slowed, systems fighting each other, computer controls versus manual overrides, and finally came to a stop on the shoulder of the highway. Catherine sat there, shaking and sobbing, her mind clearing slowly as the distance from the last overpass increased and the emotional imprints faded. She looked in her mirrors and saw the overpasses behind her, dark structures against the night sky, and on each one, barely visible in the ambient light, shadows stood at the edges, looking down at the highway, waiting for the next vehicle to pass beneath so they could jump again, so they could reenact their deaths again, so they could share their final despair with living drivers who would carry those emotions forward. Catherine called 911, reporting what she had experienced, trying to explain about the shadows and the jumpers and the overpasses. The dispatcher was professional but skeptical, promising to send a police unit to check on her welfare. When the state trooper arrived 20 minutes later, Catherine tried to explain, but even to her own ears the story sounded insane. The trooper checked her for signs of intoxication or drug use, found nothing, and eventually drove her to a nearby hospital for psychiatric evaluation, arranging for her truck to be towed to a secure lot. Catherine was held for 72 hours of observation, during which time she researched overpass suicides on Interstate 65. She found multiple incidents spanning decades, people who had jumped from overpasses into traffic, some dying immediately, others surviving with catastrophic injuries. The most recent incident had been just 3 months before Catherine's experience, a teenager who had jumped from an overpass near the exact stretch where Catherine had seen the densest concentration of shadows. After her release, Catherine refused to drive Interstate 65 at night ever again. She transferred to daytime routes and specifically avoided that stretch of highway in Indiana. Her company, concerned about her mental health, agreed to accommodate her requests. Catherine's experience went into her permanent record as a psychological episode, a night of hallucinations and emotional breakdown that required hospitalization and ongoing therapy. But Catherine knows what she saw was real. The shadows were real, the jumpers were real, their despair was real and infected her mind, nearly adding her to their number. She warns other drivers when she can, telling them to avoid certain overpasses after midnight. To never drive that stretch of Indiana highway alone at night. To be prepared for the shadows that fall and pass through without impact, but leave behind emotional scars that never heal. And the shadows continue their eternal falling, jumping from overpasses every night, reenacting their deaths for any driver whose perception is attuned to see them, whose mind is open enough or tired enough or broken enough to witness the replay of final moments. Desperate acts frozen in time, people who jumped and killed themselves and now can never stop jumping, can never complete their deaths, can never rest, just fall again and again through trucks and cars and buses, spreading their despair to the living, hoping someone will understand their pain or perhaps hoping someone will join them, adding another shadow to the overpasses, another jumper to the eternal parade, another lost soul falling forever through a world that can no longer touch them but that they can still touch, spreading darkness and hopelessness to travelers who drive beneath them, infecting the living with the dead's final emotions, poisoning highways with suicide's residue, turning overpasses into monuments to despair where shadows wait to fall and fall and fall until the road itself is heavy with the weight of all those deaths, all those jumps, all those moments when someone decided the pain was too much and gravity offered the only escape, an escape that turned out to be no escape at all but rather an eternal trap from which there is no release. Just endless falling through an endless night under endless overpasses that line highways like gallows, waiting for the next witness, the next victim, the next shadow to join the collection. Story 8. The Mile That Repeats. Jonathan Price had been a professional trucker for 16 years, hauling various cargo across the United States. On April 4, 2018, he was transporting a load of agricultural equipment from Fresno, California to Boise, Idaho, taking Highway 395 north through Nevada. His truck was a 2015 Kenworth T680 with advanced GPS navigation and communication systems. The spring night was cool, temperatures in the 50s with clear skies and a waxing moon providing ambient light across the desert landscape. Around 1 a.m., Jonathan was driving through a particularly remote section of highway between the towns of Alturas and Lakeview, approximately 80 miles of road with minimal services or habitation. The highway was straight, cutting through sagebrush desert with no other vehicles visible in either direction. Jonathan's GPS showed him on Highway 395 heading north, his position updating normally as he drove. Then Jonathan noticed something odd about his mile markers. He passed mile marker 127, which was correct for his position according to the GPS. But approximately 1 minute later, traveling at 65 miles per hour, he passed mile marker 127 again. The exact same marker, same location relative to landmarks like a distinctive rock formation and a dead tree positioned where mile marker 128 should have been. Jonathan frowned, thinking perhaps he had misread the first marker. But he was certain it had read 127. He watched carefully now, and sure enough, 1 minute later, mile marker 127 appeared again. And again 1 minute later. And again. Jonathan was passing the same mile marker repeatedly, approximately every minute, despite driving continuously forward at 65 miles per hour. Jonathan checked his GPS. It showed him advancing normally, his position moving north along Highway 395, his location updating in real time. But the physical mile markers contradicted the GPS, showing him passing the same location over and over. Jonathan tried changing speed, accelerating to 75 miles per hour, but mile marker 127 appeared right on schedule based on his new speed. He tried slowing to 50 miles per hour and the marker appeared at the adjusted interval. The repetition matched his speed perfectly, as if reality was looping, recycling the same mile of highway regardless of how fast or slow Jonathan traveled through it. Jonathan grabbed his CB radio, calling out to any other drivers in the area. "This is Jonathan Price on Highway 395 in Nevada. I'm stuck in some kind of loop. I keep passing the same mile marker over and over. Is anybody else experiencing this? Static answered him, broken and heavy, no voices responding. Jonathan tried his cell phone, thinking he would call his dispatcher or emergency services, but the phone showed no signal. Not unusual in rural Nevada, but frustrating given his situation. The landscape outside was unchanging, the same rock formation, the same dead tree, the same section of road repeating endlessly. Jonathan could see ahead approximately half a mile in his headlights and the moonlight, and the road looked normal, continuing straight north. But when he drove that half mile, he found himself back at the beginning. Mile marker 127 appearing again. The rock formation and dead tree in the same positions they had been 1 minute earlier. Jonathan tried pulling over, stopping the truck to break the loop. He parked on the shoulder, set the parking brake, and climbed down from the cab. The desert air was cool and quiet, no sounds except the ticking of his engine as it cooled. Jonathan walked forward along the shoulder, flashlight in hand, examining the road and surroundings. Everything looked normal, real, physical. He could feel the pavement under his boots, could see his breath in the cool air, could smell the sage and dry earth. He walked approximately a quarter mile, then turned to look back at his truck. It was gone. The highway behind him was empty, no vehicle visible anywhere. Jonathan felt panic spike immediately. He ran back toward where his truck had been parked, but the section of road where he had stopped was empty. No tire marks, no evidence a truck had ever been there. Jonathan was alone on the highway with no vehicle, no way to continue, no way to escape. Then Jonathan heard an engine, the distinctive sound of a diesel truck approaching. He turned and saw headlights in the distance coming toward him from the south. Relief flooded through him as the truck drew closer, his own truck, with himself visible in the driver's seat. Jonathan watched himself drive past, saw himself looking forward at the road, completely unaware of his doppelganger standing on the shoulder. The truck continued north and disappeared around a curve that didn't exist, the road being perfectly straight, and Jonathan understood. He wasn't in a loop. He was in a split, a fragmented timeline where multiple versions of himself and his truck existed simultaneously, each passing through the same mile from slightly different temporal positions. The mile wasn't repeating. Reality was splitting, creating multiple Jonathan Prices, all driving through mile 127 at the same time, but in different layers of existence. Jonathan tried to flag down the next version of himself that drove past, waving his arms and shouting, but the truck passed through him like he wasn't there, like he was a ghost without substance. Again and again his truck drove past, sometimes with seconds between iterations, sometimes with minutes. Dozens of Jonathan Prices, all trapped in mile 127, all believing they were driving forward, all actually frozen in a temporal anomaly that captured them and wouldn't release them. Jonathan tried walking north, hoping to physically force himself out of the mile. But the road stretched endlessly, the same landmarks repeating, the same rock formation and dead tree appearing every quarter mile in a pattern that suggested infinite duplication. He tried walking south, but the same thing happened, endless repetition, no escape in either direction. Hours passed, or minutes, or seconds, time having lost meaning in the loop. Jonathan saw himself drive past countless times, occasionally saw other vehicles that must have been caught in the same anomaly. Trucks and cars passing through, their drivers unaware they were trapped in a mile that wouldn't end. He tried to keep track of time using his watch, but the hands moved erratically, sometimes forward, sometimes backward, sometimes spinning rapidly, reflecting the temporal distortion that held him. Then Jonathan saw something that made his already frayed sanity crack further. A figure was walking along the shoulder ahead, moving toward him. As it drew closer, Jonathan recognized it. Another version of himself, but this one looked wrong. Aged and deteriorated, skin hanging loose on its frame, clothing rotted and falling apart, eyes hollow and haunted. The figure approached Jonathan and spoke with a voice that was his but worn thin by time. "You've been here 10 years. I've been here 20. Some of us have been here 50 years or more. The mile doesn't let go once it catches you. You're trapped now just like the rest of us." Jonathan stared at his future self, at what he would become after decades trapped in this impossible mile, aging and dying but never escaping, experiencing time passing while remaining spatially frozen. "How do I get out?" Jonathan asked desperately. The aged version of himself laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "You don't. None of us do. We're all here forever, walking the same mile, watching ourselves drive past, growing older and crazier until we forget we were ever anywhere else." Jonathan refused to accept it. He ran, sprinting north along the highway, pushing his body to its limits, determined to physically force himself beyond the boundary of the mile. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out, collapsing on the pavement, and when he looked up, mile marker 127 was directly ahead of him, mocking his efforts. No distance traveled, no escape achieved, just the same infinite mile stretching in all directions. Jonathan lay there on the highway and wept, broken by the impossibility, crushed by the knowledge that he would never leave this place, never complete his delivery, never see his family again, never exist anywhere except this cursed mile of Nevada highway that captured travelers and held them forever. Other versions of himself walked past, some fresh and panicked, others aged and resigned, all trapped in different stages of accepting their eternal imprisonment. Then, without warning, Jonathan was in his truck driving, approaching mile marker 128. The transition was instantaneous, no sense of movement, just a discontinuity where he was walking on the highway and then he was driving again, past the anomaly, released from the mile. Jonathan's GPS showed the correct position. His clock showed 1:47 a.m., approximately 45 minutes after he had first entered the loop. According to his experience, he had been trapped for hours or possibly days. But according to his instruments, less than an hour had passed. Jonathan pulled over at the next town, his entire body shaking with relief and trauma. He reported the incident to no one, knowing how insane it would sound. But Jonathan researched Highway 395 mile marker 127 later, looking for any information about the location. He found references to temporal anomalies and disappearances, online posts from people who claim to have experienced time distortions or seen multiple versions of the same vehicle driving simultaneously, most dismissed as hoaxes or hallucinations. Jonathan never drove that stretch of highway again, always routing around it even if it added hours to his journey. And sometimes, late at night when he can't sleep, Jonathan wonders about the versions of himself he left behind. The Jonathan Prices who didn't escape the mile, who are still trapped there walking the eternal highway, watching their own trucks drive past, aging and deteriorating but never dying, never escaping. Never anything except prisoners of mile marker 127, where reality fractures and traps travelers in temporal loops that feel like eternity and last anywhere from minutes to lifetimes, depending on which side of the split you experience. Whether you're the lucky iteration that escapes after 45 minutes or the unlucky iteration that walks the same mile for decades, watching yourself drive past in an endless parade of temporal echoes, all trapped, all suffering, all marking time in a space where time has lost all meaning, except as a measure of how long you've been imprisoned in the mile that repeats and never ends and holds its victims forever in a moment that spans years, a space that spans nowhere. A highway that leads only to itself in an infinite loop that catches drivers who pass through at exactly the wrong moment and never lets them leave. Just recycles them again and again through the same distance until they forget they were ever anywhere else. Until the mile becomes their entire universe. Until mile marker 127 is the only truth they know and escape is a memory so faded it might as well be a dream from a life they never actually lived at all. Story 9. The voice in the sleeper cab. Marcus Donnelly had been a long-haul trucker for 13 years, specializing in cross-country routes that kept him on the road for weeks at a time. On June 15, 2015, he was hauling a load of textiles from Charlotte, North Carolina to Portland, Oregon, a journey that would take him approximately 5 days with mandatory rest stops. His truck was a 2013 Freightliner Cascadia with a spacious sleeper cab that included a bed, small refrigerator, and personal entertainment system. The summer night was warm as Marcus drove through Tennessee on Interstate 40, making good time toward his first scheduled rest in Arkansas. Around 11 p.m., Marcus began feeling the fatigue of a long day's driving and decided to pull into a rest area for his mandatory 10-hour break. He found a quiet spot in the commercial vehicle parking area, away from the main building and other trucks, preferring privacy during his rest periods. Marcus went through his usual shutdown routine. Engine off, curtains drawn, climate control activated, phone plugged in to charge. He changed into sleeping clothes, set his alarm for 9 a.m., and climbed into the sleeper bunk. Marcus was drifting off to sleep when he heard something that brought him fully awake. Breathing. Not his own breathing, but someone else's, slow and steady, coming from the darkness of the sleeper cab. Marcus's hand shot to the small LED light mounted near the bed, clicking it on. The sleeper cab was empty, no one visible, just his belongings and the bed he was lying in. Marcus checked the curtain separating the sleeper from the cab, confirming it was closed. He looked under the bed, finding only storage compartments filled with his clothes and supplies. The breathing continued, unaffected by the light, a steady rhythm that suggested deep sleep or unconsciousness. Marcus felt his skin crawl as he tried to locate the source. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the small space with someone else's respiration. Marcus called out, his voice uncertain and afraid. "Who's there?" "This is my truck. You need to leave right now." A voice answered, male and weary, speaking from the darkness despite the light illuminating the entire sleeper cab. "I can't leave. I died here. This is where my body gave out. Heart attack 3 years ago. Fell asleep in the bunk and never woke up. They found me 2 days later when my dispatcher couldn't reach me. I've been here ever since, sleeping in the space between wake and death, breathing but not breathing, existing but not existing." Marcus's blood froze. He was hearing the ghost of a driver who had died in this sleeper cab, a previous owner or user of the truck whose death had bound his spirit to the vehicle. Marcus forced himself to speak, his voice shaking. "This is my truck. I bought it from the company 2 years ago. If someone died in it before I owned it, I wasn't told. But you need to move on. You can't stay here. This is my space now." The voice responded with something that might have been laughter, though it sounded more like sighing. "I don't have anywhere else to go. This is where I died. The sleeper cab is my coffin. Every night different drivers sleep here, and every night I sleep with them, sharing their dreams, experiencing their rest. You're not the first and you won't be the last. We all sleep together in this space, the living and the dead, separated by the thinnest membrane of reality." Marcus felt nausea rising. The thought of sleeping in the same bunk where someone had died, of sharing space with a corpse's ghost, was overwhelming. He climbed out of the bunk and retreated to the driver's seat, leaving the sleeper cab behind. He would sleep upright in the driver's seat, uncomfortable but preferable to sharing a bed with a dead man's spirit. But the breathing followed him. Marcus heard it in the cab too, the same steady rhythm, the ghost not confined to the sleeper but present throughout the entire truck. Marcus grabbed his phone, thinking he would leave the truck entirely and sleep in the rest area building. But before he could open the door, the voice spoke again, now coming from right beside him, intimate and close, though nothing was visible. "Don't leave. If you leave, you'll never be able to come back. The truck will belong to me completely. Every driver who abandons me makes me stronger, gives me more claim to the space. Stay, sleep with me, share the rest. It's not so bad once you accept it. Marcus's hand froze on the door handle. The implication was clear. If he left now, he would never be able to drive this truck again. The ghost would claim it completely, possessing the vehicle and making it uninhabitable for the living. Marcus had $40,000 invested in this truck. His livelihood depended on it, and abandoning it would mean financial ruin. But staying meant sleeping with a ghost, sharing his most vulnerable moments with something dead that refused to move on. Marcus made a decision. He would stay, would reclaim his sleeper cab, would refuse to be driven out of his own truck by a dead man. He climbed back into the sleeper bunk, pulled the covers up, and spoke firmly into the darkness. This is my truck. You died here, and I'm sorry for that, but you don't own this space anymore. I do. You can stay if you must, but you don't control me, you don't drive me away, and you don't get to make me afraid in my own bed. Silence answered him for a long moment. Then the voice spoke again, and this time it sounded different, sad and resigned. You're braver than most, or more stubborn. Fine, we'll share the space. But understand this. Every night when you sleep, I'll be here too, breathing with you, dreaming with you, dying with you. And eventually, when your time comes, you might die here too, in this same bunk. And then we'll both be ghosts, sharing the space forever with whoever comes next. The breathing continued, steady and eternal, and Marcus lay there with his eyes open, unable to sleep despite his exhaustion. Hours passed, the breathing never ceasing, a constant reminder that he was not alone, that death slept beside him in the narrow bunk. Eventually, as dawn approached, Marcus drifted into an uneasy sleep, his dreams filled with images of a man having a heart attack, clutching his chest, gasping for air that wouldn't come, dying alone in a truck identical to Marcus's. When Marcus's alarm woke him at 9 a.m., the breathing was gone. Daylight filled the sleeper cab and the space felt normal, empty, just Marcus and his belongings. But Marcus knew the ghost was still there, just dormant or invisible in the daylight, waiting for darkness and sleep to manifest again. Marcus tried to convince himself the experience had been a dream or hallucination, stress and fatigue creating false perceptions. But deep down, he knew it was real. Marcus continued his journey to Portland, and each night when he stopped to rest, the breathing returned. Every night the ghost was present, sharing his sleep, whispering occasionally in the darkness, reminding Marcus that he was never truly alone in his truck. Marcus researched the truck's history, trying to find information about the previous driver who had died. He contacted his company, asking for records, and eventually learned the truth. The truck had been owned by a driver named Thomas Whitaker, who had died of a heart attack while sleeping in the cab during a rest stop in Tennessee, approximately 3 years before Marcus purchased the vehicle. Thomas's body had been found by a state trooper performing a wellness check after the company reported him missing. The truck had been cleaned, sanitized, and returned to service. Sold eventually to Marcus, who had no knowledge of its history. Marcus tried blessing the truck, hiring a priest to perform a cleansing ritual, but the breathing continued every night. He tried sleeping in hotels instead of the truck, but the financial cost was unsustainable for a long-haul driver. He considered selling the truck, but revealing it was haunted would make it unsellable, and hiding the haunting felt unethical. Marcus was trapped with his ghost, bound to share his sleeping space with a dead man who refused to move on. Over months, Marcus became accustomed to the breathing, learned to sleep through it, even found a strange comfort in not being completely alone during the long nights. The ghost, for its part, became less hostile, occasionally speaking words of encouragement or warning when road conditions were dangerous. An uneasy partnership formed, the living and the dead sharing a truck and learning to coexist. But Marcus knows he's living on borrowed time. Every night when he sleeps in that bunk, he risks joining Thomas, risks his own heart giving out and binding his spirit to the truck just as Thomas's spirit is bound. And Marcus wonders if that's the ghost's ultimate goal. To have permanent company, to create a growing community of dead drivers all trapped in the same sleeper cab, all breathing together in the darkness, all waiting for the next living driver to join them in the space between wake and death where the exhausted rest eternally, but never wake to see another sunrise. Marcus still drives his truck, still sleeps in the haunted bunk, still hears the breathing every night, and he knows one night he'll close his eyes and never open them again. His own breathing joining the chorus of dead drivers who made the mistake of dying in their sleeper cabs and now can never leave, never escape, never stop sharing that intimate space with whoever is foolish or desperate enough to sleep there, creating an endless chain of haunted drivers linked across time by the simple act of resting in a cursed bunk that collects souls the way some places collect dust, accumulating death with every passing year until the sleeper cab becomes so crowded with ghosts there's barely room for the living, yet drivers keep coming, keep sleeping, keep joining the collection, adding their breathing to the eternal symphony of the dead who rest but never wake, who dream but never achieve, who sleep forever in the narrow darkness between the living world and whatever comes next. Story 10. The Final Delivery. Samuel Rivera had been driving commercial trucks for 28 years, the longest tenure of any driver at his company. On December 31, 2017, he was assigned what should have been a simple delivery. Transport a sealed container from a warehouse in El Paso, Texas, to an address in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. The manifest listed the contents as personal effects and final arrangements, which Samuel assumed meant household goods for someone relocating or perhaps estate items being delivered to an heir. The pay was exceptionally good for such a short haul, $3,000 for approximately 200 miles, which should have been his first warning that something about the job was unusual. Samuel loaded the container himself, a simple 6-foot metal box that weighed approximately 300 pounds according to the warehouse scale. The box was sealed with heavy-duty locks and marked with handling instructions that specified it must remain upright, must not be opened under any circumstances, and must be delivered to the exact address by midnight on December 31st. The tight deadline was the reason for the premium pay, the client apparently insisting the delivery occur before the new year began. Samuel departed El Paso around 6 p.m., giving himself ample time to complete the 200-mile journey and arrive by the midnight deadline. New Year's Eve traffic was light, most people already at parties or celebrations, leaving the highways relatively empty. The winter night was cold, temperatures near freezing with clear skies showing countless stars. Samuel's truck ran smoothly, his GPS showing the route clearly, everything proceeding according to plan. Around 9:30 p.m., approximately halfway to the destination, Samuel began hearing sounds from the container in his trailer. Scratching like fingernails on metal coming from inside the sealed box. Samuel's first thought was that an animal had somehow gotten into the container before it was sealed, perhaps a cat or raccoon seeking shelter. But the scratching was too deliberate, too rhythmic, suggesting intelligence and purpose rather than an animal's panic. The scratching continued, growing louder and more insistent. Then Samuel heard something that made his blood run cold. A voice, muffled but distinctly human, coming from inside the sealed container. "Let me out. Please. I don't want to go. Please don't take me there. Let me out." The voice was terrified, desperate, the plea of someone trapped and frightened. Samuel immediately pulled over, his mind racing through the implications. If someone was trapped in the container, he had to let them out immediately, regardless of the instructions about not opening it. But another part of him, the part that had survived 28 years of trucking by following rules and completing jobs without complications, warned him that opening a sealed container violated his contract and could result in legal consequences or financial penalties. The voice continued, now accompanied by pounding, the container shaking in the trailer as whoever was inside beat against the walls. "Please, I don't want to die. Don't take me to that place. Let me out. I'll pay you anything, please." The desperation was overwhelming, and Samuel made his decision. He would open the container, free whoever was trapped, and deal with the legal and financial consequences later. A human life was worth more than money or contract obligations. Samuel climbed into the trailer with his bolt cutters, approaching the sealed container. Up close, he could feel vibration from the pounding inside, could hear the voice clearly begging for release. Samuel positioned his bolt cutters on the first lock and began cutting. The lock was heavy-duty hardened steel, requiring significant effort, but Samuel was motivated by the imprisoned person's pleas. The first lock broke free, and Samuel moved to the second. As he cut the second lock, the voice inside the container changed, becoming multiple voices, all speaking simultaneously. "Don't open it. Don't let me out. I'm not supposed to be free. I'm being delivered. The delivery must be completed. Stop cutting the lock." The conflicting messages, the same voice both begging for release and demanding to remain sealed, made Samuel pause. What was he freeing? Was this actually a person, or was something else inside the container, something that wanted out but shouldn't be released? Samuel stepped back. The second lock cut, but the container still secured by a third. The pounding increased, violent impacts that dented the metal from inside, something strong enough to damage steel, striking with desperate force. The voices continued their contradictory pleas. "Release me, trap me, save me, damn me, let me out, keep me in." Samuel realized with horror that whatever was in the container was fighting itself, part of it wanting freedom and part of it knowing freedom would be catastrophic. Samuel retreated from the trailer and called the number listed on his manifest, the client who had arranged the delivery. An elderly woman answered, her voice calm despite the late hour. Samuel explained the situation. The noises from the container, the voices, his concern that someone might be trapped inside. The woman listened without interruption, then spoke with weary resignation. "Driver, you must not open that container. What's inside is my husband, or what's left of him. He died 3 days ago, but death didn't take him completely. Part of his consciousness remains trapped in his body, aware but unable to move on. I'm having him delivered to a facility that specializes in such cases, a place where they can perform the final rites that will release him properly. If you open the container before reaching the facility, his partial consciousness will escape, and it will be trapped between life and death forever. Unable to die, unable to live, just existing in agony. Please, complete the delivery, help him find peace." Samuel's hands shook as he processed the explanation. The woman was claiming her husband was experiencing some kind of incomplete death, his consciousness lingering in his corpse, and the sealed container was necessary to transport him to a facility that could finish what death had started. It sounded insane, impossible, but the evidence inside the trailer contradicted all rational explanations. Something was in that container, something that was both alive and dead, trapped in a state that shouldn't exist. Samuel agreed to complete the delivery, though every instinct screamed at him to open the container and release whatever was trapped inside. He climbed back into his cab and continued driving toward truth or consequences, the pounding and voices from the trailer continuing, sometimes pleading for release, sometimes thanking him for not opening the locks. The internal conflict of the thing in the container playing out in real time as Samuel carried it toward its destination. The address he had been given was on the outskirts of truth or consequences, a property that appeared to be an old funeral home or mortuary, dark and weathered but maintained. Samuel pulled into the driveway at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the midnight deadline. As he parked, figures emerged from the building, 4 people wearing dark clothing and carrying candles, their faces solemn and focused. They approached Samuel's truck without speaking, moving to the trailer and opening it with a key they already possessed. The figures surrounded the sealed container, and Samuel heard them begin chanting in a language he didn't recognize, old words that seemed to vibrate through the air. The pounding inside the container intensified, the voices screaming now, a chorus of terror and rage and despair all emanating from the single sealed box. The chanting grew louder, competing with the screams, and as midnight approached, the sound reached a crescendo that was nearly unbearable. Then, precisely at midnight, everything stopped. The pounding ceased, the voices cut off mid-scream, and a profound silence fell over the scene. The figures opened the container, and Samuel saw inside. A body, a man in his 70s, lying peacefully with his eyes closed, finally and completely dead in a way he hadn't been before, fully released into whatever comes after life. The woman who had spoken to Samuel on the phone emerged from the building, tears streaming down her face, and she approached the container to kiss her husband's forehead. "Thank you," she whispered to the corpse. "Thank you for holding on until we could help you let go." She turned to Samuel and handed him an envelope containing his payment plus a substantial tip. "You did well, driver." Many wouldn't have completed the delivery. Many would have opened the container despite the instructions, dooming my husband to an eternity of half-death. You gave him the gift of true ending, of final peace. For that I'm grateful beyond words. Samuel took the money, too shaken to speak, and departed the property as quickly as he could, leaving behind the mortuary and its strange ritual and the man who had needed to be delivered to his own death because dying once hadn't been enough. Samuel never accepted another job from that client, never hauled another sealed container marked with cryptic instructions, never drove through truth or consequences again. But he researched incomplete death, finding scattered references to people who died but didn't transition fully, their consciousness remaining tethered to their bodies, trapped in a liminal state between life and whatever follows. Most cultures had traditions for dealing with such cases, rituals and procedures designed to sever the connection and release the lingering consciousness. Samuel came to understand he had participated in such a ritual, that his role had been crucial to completing the process, that the deadline of midnight on New Year's Eve had been significant for spiritual reasons he didn't fully grasp. He had delivered a man to his own death, had been the ferryman carrying a partial soul to its final destination, and the experience had shown Samuel that death wasn't always instant or complete, that sometimes people lingered in their bodies aware but unable to move on, trapped until someone could perform the rites that would release them into the true and final darkness. And Samuel wonders how many other drivers have made similar deliveries without knowing what they carried. How many sealed containers hold partial consciousnesses being transported to facilities that can complete their deaths. How many desperate voices cry out from cargo bays and trailers, begging for release or begging to remain sealed depending on which part of their fractured consciousness is dominant in that moment. Samuel retired from trucking 6 months after the delivery, unable to continue knowing what might be in the sealed containers and locked boxes he was asked to transport. Unable to wonder if the scratching he heard was just cargo shifting, or if it was someone trapped in incomplete death, begging for help that Samuel couldn't provide without violating his contract, without opening seals that were meant to stay closed until the proper destination was reached and the proper rituals performed, releasing the trapped souls into the mercy of true ending, the final delivery that ends all journeys and brings peace to those who linger too long between the worlds, who hold on too tightly to life even as life releases them, who need to be carried by unwitting drivers to places where death can be completed, and the terrible awareness that survives bodily death can finally be extinguished, giving rest to the weary, silence to the screaming, peace to those who died but couldn't finish dying, who needed one last journey, one final delivery, one terminal ride in a sealed container marked, "Do not open until destination," because opening it would trap them forever in the space between, while keeping it sealed and completing the delivery gave them the one thing they desperately needed. The gift of true and total death, the ending that death itself had failed to provide, requiring human intervention and midnight rituals and drivers willing to ignore the voices and complete the job. Delivering souls to their final destinations even as those souls begged to be freed or kept locked, depending on which part of their divided consciousness manages to speak through the walls of their metal coffins, rolling through the night toward places where ending is a service provided by those who understand that death isn't always enough. That sometimes you need to die again, properly this time, finally this time, completely this time, with help from the living who serve as unwitting psychopomps carrying the almost dead to their true and final rest.